Hey everybody, welcome to Black Room Secrets. 2 weeks in a row. What's happening? We'll see if I can keep it going. But tonight I'm joined by my friend Rachel Gluckstern. Hi Rachel,
Hello.
or if I may call you Ray.
You may.
So I'll get into how we met in a little bit. But I want to kind of just go with your credentials up front. Ray has been working in the publishing industry for a very long time, and especially the comic books industry. You are basically my comic books guru. I don't know anybody who would know more than you. Not only are you a fan, you actually work with them. Um, so, we'll get into that. But the way we first met was through the New York goth scene in the early 2000s, I believe.
Yep.
It feels kind of a long time ago. And you're an example of that's almost like um, archetypical story of somebody coming to New York to pursue a dream, which I I I'm very impressed by people who are able to do that. To me, this we came to the city from another country, but it's I was 12 at the time, and it was really my parents doing that, and everything seemed very scary. And now I live in the suburbs because the city is still a little bit scary to me. I like to visit, but so I want to get into that. How did you decide to go to a city from? And
Well,
you should mention from Colorado, where you're from.
it's true. I was indeed born and raised in Colorado, but my dad's parents were actually from Brooklyn. Um, they did not meet until they were out in Colorado. But I have, my mom is from New England. She was born and raised in New England. My dad's parents are from Brooklyn. So I have a lot of East Coast sensibilities in my blood. Um, and growing up in Colorado, in the suburbs, basically, or a college town. Um,
Everything was just like South Park, right?
Excuse me, my hometown is much bigger than South Park, but it is, and we don't have as much snow. But there are some Coloradoisms where I'm like, yep, that's that nobody outside of Colorado gets. The most classic example, and I'm going to meander for a second, is the Casa Bonita episode where Cartman is just jonesing to go to this tacky cowboy themed restaurant with great sopapillas. The experience that they have going to Casa Bonita is true to life. it was it was hilarious. So anyway, so
I'm sad that I didn't get to go there the one time I did go to Colorado. But didn't they buy it and re renovating it?
yes, they bought it. I think it's had a soft opening because some of my Colorado friends have gone to it within the past couple months. So you might be able to next time. Um so I'm from Colorado, but growing up in that area, I was obviously, I was a nerd, and then I had the weird spooky tendencies. It was not a right fit for me. And I was raised with an appreciation for art and culture and food and um New York just always seemed like the destination for me. And once I found out that comics and publishing in general was largely centered in New York, that became my big goal. Once I graduated from college. So my goal was go to college, pursue a course of study that would allow me to pursue a career of editorial, particularly in comics, and then move to New York. And the day after I graduated college, I moved to New York.
What,
Uh,
literally?
Literally the day after.
Oh God! Wow,
I was very focused, Serge.
I see that.
Uh, yeah. But I mean, in fairness, like I had done an internship. So I ended up my biggest goal was to work at DC Comics and work on Batman comics because Batman's my favorite character. And people like to argue about this, and I don't know why. Batman's my favorite. Just deal with it, people.
I mean,
Uh,
I think for a goth person, all right, a person of goth tendencies, right? I mean that feels
it seems
very
pretty.
natural,
Yeah.
you know. Whereas,
Catwoman is also one of my favorites, although I do love Superman and Wonder Woman. So that's the controversial statement in the Gluckstern.
yeah, I think that's more surprising, if anything.
We wouldn't have a comics industry without Superman.
Sure, fair enough.
That's just how it is. So so I had done an internship at DC during
So,
college.
sorry.
So I had
Before
connections.
we get into the New York portion,
Oh,
just
okay.
just real quick, as far as your kind of formative years in Colorado. So, how did you get into comics? Well let's just start there.
All right. Well, the answer to both how did I get into comics and how do I, kind of get into goth is actually rooted in my family, both interests and communities and influences. Um, my dad had all these collected editions of various comics and his comics history that I read when I was growing up. My uncle had an amazing stash of Marvel comics that were stored at my grandma's. So, like all these great 70s Marvels that I may or may not have a couple of boxes of. He loaned them to me. He said so. He done forgot, but that's fine. Uh, so I just grew up reading comics, reading all this history about comics, and getting steeped in it. Now, what this means is I was not up to date with what was going on at the time. You know, I was all steeped in like Golden Age and Silver Age, the beginning and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So I was not aware of what was going on in the 80s and 90s per se until I started collecting in high school for my own self. But I had a pretty strong foundation to be working from at that point. And New Batman was my favorite.
Fair enough.
But there's the very seminal 80s Batman comic, The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson and Lynn Varley. And that's, a take on Batman coming out of retirement. He's in his 50s. Gotham has just gone to hell. All of his allies have deserted. Things are just so much more bleak and grim. And I read that because I was talking about superheroes to my dad one day. And I said, Superman's great, but ultimately I love Batman more. And he said, well, did you ever read the comic where Batman beats up Superman? And I was like, no. So he's the one who gave me his collected edition of The Dark Knight Returns to read. So, not that I was allowed to keep it, it was his. But it does point to just how much of an influence. And I do have to take a moment and say my mom used to collect Thor because she gets very mad when she's left out of the comics influence, who influenced my love of comics discussion. So, family legacy, really.
I mean, I think that's awesome, to have parents who can pass on that sort of, obsession, maybe we can say. But
I would say I took the obsession the farthest. And the same with goth. My dad, my parents became parents young. My mom was 25 when she had me, and I was the second child. So my dad especially was very tuned into the music that was going on, and as we all know, the 80s was an amazing time for music. 70s and 80s, and I mean to this day he keeps up with it. He's got Interpol albums and Gnarls Barkley and whatnot. It's crazy. But that meant I grew up listening to all of the great, 80s new wave stuff. He had the Go-Go's, he had the B-52s, He had Love and Rockets. He's like, this is Love and Rockets. They're named after a comic book. They used to be in this band called Bauhaus. He didn't have any Bauhaus, but my older sister had a Bauhaus cassette. So I think what's interesting about this experience is that a lot of people assume that being goth is some sort of rebellious phase. You know, you're doing it to lash out at your parents and to lash out at the conformity around you. But I was raised by weirdos who were already listening to this type of music.
You were essentially conforming to their
I was a
aesthetic.
conformist. Exactly. Now, don't get me wrong, they don't dress in the same way I do.
Of course.
So I think that took some adjustment. And they didn't, my mom was not crazy about my brief flirtation with Wicca when I was, 15. But as far as the music goes and getting to explore the aesthetic I wanted to explore, it was never actually a problem. My mom still thinks me and my goth friends are very adorable.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, but let me tell you, nothing. If you want to see whether this is a rebellious phase or a for real thing, just tell your teenage kid that you think it's adorable. And if they stick with it, it's real.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that just deflates you, man.
So let me ask you about your high school experience. Was there like a goth group? Was there comics, people that you could like share that with? I'll go first, so real quick.
Yeah.
Comics were I assume people were, some people in my high school were into that. I just had no idea. Weirdly enough, my exposure to comics in the first place was technically in Russia, where anything Western was like, oh my god, this is so cool. So we had this game we played where we kind of like the Bazooka Joe comics, right?
Oh yeah.
So there were apparently, I don't know of anybody else in America who was doing that, but in Europe, a lot of companies put out their own little like comic things in the candy or gum
Oh
or whatever.
really?
So, and whatever we could get our hands on from there, we basically had a game where I don't want to I'm not going to get into the mechanics, but we basically you try to get the other person's little comic, right? So and then you amass your collection. So even though I couldn't read English or whatever language it was in, that was my first exposure to the genre, so to speak. And then when I was going to the yeshiva in New York, when I barely could speak English, I was still learning English, right? That was my first year here. I forget, but there was some kind of a project I had to do. And for whatever reason, I can't remember it. I decided to like make my own comic, except I can't draw for shit. So I ended up tracing Archie's comics. So I just pick like different parts to make my own scenes. And that I picked up, I think, from summer camp. Somebody else was reading, reading Archie comics in summer camp, and I was like, oh, what's this? So I think that was my first, first exposure, so to speak. And as far as like there were goths in my school, but I wasn't cool enough to be one of them yet. So, all I knew at the time was like, wow, those people look cool and they dress in black, but I didn't really know much about it until college.
So. Well, it's interesting that you ask about my high school experience. I did not have a great high school experience. A lot of the nerd friends I'd had in junior high just were not comfortable with this whole goth persona I was starting to develop in high school. And then I also went to a different high school for 1 year, and that really separated me. Where I mainly was hanging out for goth friends was there was an amazing coffee shop downtown. And I always wonder where people are hanging out nowadays with, considering helicopter parents and suburbs don't necessarily have good all ages places.
Let me
There are
tell you
no
what.
more malls.
Let me tell you where we were hanging out in my high school days at Taco Bell.
Oh, we did that too. Gosh, we love Taco Bell. But there was this great coffee shop. In Denver, there was a coffee shop called Paris on the Platte, which was named after the Platte River. So they opened a branch in my hometown called Paris on the Pooter before the Cachalapooter River that flowed through my hometown. And that's where all the punks and goths and skate kids and just alternative weirdos and sketchy people, we all hung out there. We'd scrape together like, $1 for coffee or $1 for a bagel or 30 cents for a clove. You could buy singles at the counter.
Oh boy.
This is when you could still smoke indoors. I am not a smoker, by the way. I'm just letting people know that's what it was back then. And that's where I really got, I'd go to school and do my thing. And I had a few friends there. But there, whatever sort of alternative goth contingent was in my school, I was not cool enough to be part of. Instead, we'd all convene downtown at this coffee shop. So that's where that was. And it's part, to get to where we first met, when I moved to New York, I was like, I'm going to find whatever the equivalent of Paris on the Pooter is. I'm going to find what that equivalent is in New York, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to meet people.
It was kind of a fascinating time because this is still kind of early days of internet, and me as somebody who was introduced to the goth scene by my ex in college.
Oh, is that? Wait, I didn't know this part.
Yes. So she was properly goth, and she took me to a downtime. No, I'm sorry. She took me to a bank. That was the first time. And I walked in and I was like, it was one of those moments where like, this is amazing, and also like I finally feel like, even though these were all people I didn't know, had no real familiarity of anything, it just felt like home.
Exactly.
It's very, very hard to describe it. So yeah, after college, whatever, obviously, that relationship ended, whatever. And I just knew that I had to somehow discover that. So I started going on my own to, downtime or whatever. But I'm like, how do I meet people? And Yahoo groups. Somebody started a goth in New York goth outings group, and that was I
think it was Scotty, wasn't it?
It was, I think it was Scotty, yeah. And it was kind of a brilliant idea because it was focused on meeting up outside of a club, because at the club it's loud as hell. Like it's very hard to make new connections. People are going to be doing their own thing, and they're not necessarily in a position to meet with other people. So doing these outings, you go somewhere else where it's more like, hey, let's do something together. And how do you become friends? You become friends by having adventures together. That's that's to me, that's like the shortest definition. So
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
I know. I love telling people that I first met my friends in New York via an Yahoo group, and people are always like, "What is that?" And I get to be the ancient one from the early internet. But yeah, I mean, I was casting around trying. I saw club nights in the Village Voice, so I try and go to those. I looked around Craigslist because that was back when it was more of a bulletin board and not just, gross. And then I think somebody possibly from Craigslist, and it might have been Scotty who founded this group, said, "Hey, here's this group that's dedicated to people doing stuff outside of clubs. You should check it out." And I was like, that is exactly what I want, Because, yeah, at a club, it's loud. If people are trying to talk with you, they're probably just trying to hook up with you. That's not the foundation for a lasting friendship, per se. Not that it can't be, but normally it's not. So, that was how I came to meet the first batch of friends that I had here, and you know, so many of us are still friends 20 years later. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was an amazing group, and one of my best decisions. I feel like.
Let's tell people some of the things that the some of the activities that we did.
So what I wonder what people think a bunch of goths would do, but
Yes,
some of the things we actually did is go to the beach, go play paintball. you know,
we played a lot of paintball. We also did the ice skating outing, which remains one of my favorite memories because there was that little girl who kept trying to kill all of us by falling down in front of us.
I was just trying to because I don't know how to skate. I was just trying to stay on my feet and not hurt anybody else.
I just don't know how. I'm still baffled that you grew up in Russia and were not forced to learn how to skate.
Well, here's the funny part. Like, um, I lived in a 9-story building in Moscow, right? So we had a yard, um, you know, behind our building, and in the summer, that's where we play soccer. In the winter, the parents would get out the water hose and make a skating rink or ice rink
Oh my
every
gosh,
winter, and we'd play hockey there. But I didn't have skates, so I just played hockey on my shoes.
you were well. I mean, you were probably safer.
I don't know, but yeah, somehow I ended up never learning how to skate. So
I think we also did some museum stuff. We would, make plans to
yeah,
go to shows together, and we would still go to clubs together. But this was a great way to like have a crew, start building a crew that you could hang out with and
right.
recognize.
Yeah, like if you think about like, what was it, is Meetup.com still around? I don't know, but that essential idea where you just meet up and do stuff. That's was
Meetup is still around. I don't know if people use it, but it is still technically in existence.
yeah. I feel so old sometimes when I reference that stuff, but
I
it
tell people about Friendster.
yeah, and that was I tried it, but that was a very short time. Um, I don't know what happened to that, but it was definitely a cool time in our I think in our lives where it's still early days. There's not social media isn't really around. I mean, there's MySpace or whatever. Um, but I feel like people were at least obviously within kind of self selection of a group we had. You're more apt to try to do things for real with each other, and like I said, you end up doing adventures together, and that's how you become friends. So, and that's what happened. So we, all sorts of people from different walks of life. New York is that kind of city where you meet all sorts of, strange and unusual people with interesting life stories. So,
It's true. And even Jersey has some of those too.
well, yeah. I mean, I count, I'm including that, even though that was part of it, right? When I was going to clubs, I'm like, oh, I'm the weird Jersey guy. Everybody's here as the cool New York people. You know,
No, as long as other Jersey people came out, you were never alone, Serge.
that's right. So, so yeah. So going back to your Jersey journey, so you came out to the city. Um, what did you do?
In terms of
Well,
finding
career, yeah,
work.
yeah.
Oh, okay. So, like I said, I had interned at DC Comics during my college years and tried to maintain, my network essentially. And when I moved to the city, I moved into this apartment that was kind of like a boarding house where one of my nerd friends that I met on the DC Comics forums. The internet really brought people together in the early aughts, I must say.
For sure.
Um, So he told me about a room in the apartment building he was living in, um, and another friend of a friend put me in touch with like a temp agency. So I had a place to live when I first moved there, and I had a temp job very quickly. So that was great. Um, I kept my goal on DC as I did like various admin jobs for a few years. I got into the early stages of comics blogging by being an editor for a comics blog site, and that helped build up my resume, even though it was all volunteer work. That was back when doing stuff for exposure was okay. Um, and I kept nagging the HR people, especially at DC, because they're the ones who have to do the first screening. And finally, um, somebody left the company, and the HR person called me and said, "Hey, there's an opening." So I applied and I interviewed for 3 months, and I have a weird superstition that if I'm trying to really achieve something, if I talk about it, it won't happen. So I kept this secret for 3 months from everybody, even the person I was dating at the time.
That's fair. I think that's not an uncommon superstition, so to speak. Yeah.
And then I got the job, and I told all of you, and started my assistant editor position toward the end of 2004. And then I was at DC for the next 10 years, slowly rising up the editorial ranks and getting to work on all sorts of things. And yes, getting to work on Batman. As far as I know, I am the first female editor to receive a full editor credit in an issue of Batman, as far as I know. But they didn't always do editorial credits back in the day, so
Right. But that's fair.
someone should fact check that.
So
And if I wasn't the first woman to edit Detective Comics, which is of course what DC Comics is named after, Detective Comics Comics.
which I didn't realize was an ongoing series until I
Yep.
did your bio, to be honest. But
Detective Comics 27 is where Batman first appeared. So if I'm not the first female editor of that, then I am in a very small elite company. But of course, I only got to edit for 6 issues, and then DC relocated to California in 2015. And that's when I was faced with, the biggest dilemma of my life. Do I stay with DC and leave New York? Do I stay in New York and leave DC?
right.
Obviously, I chose New York. And it was a huge gamble, but there was at the very bottom of it, there was the practical concern that I would move out to California, they would lay me off, and then I'd be stuck in California where publishing is not centralized. And what would I do then?
Right.
So I said, I'm going to stay in New York. I'm going to go into real publishing, which is book publishing. And I will always have DC in my heart. But I think it was the right move to make. It was such a hard decision. But I've never really regretted it, despite the fact that that's all I lived for when I first moved to New York, which is kind of crazy to say, but I gave it a decade.
Right. I mean, that's pretty good. And we all change as we grow, and our desires and situations change. So I think doing something you dream of doing is amazing to me, because I don't think that's something I got to do, right? Most people, I don't think, really get to experience that. So
I was very focused. That was actually the biggest adjustment I had to make when I left DC. It was not the fact that I wasn't at DC anymore. It's that I had always had a tunnel vision around what I was going to do for my career and everything, and I just didn't know. I didn't know what that new dream should be,
Right.
and I've never fully replaced it. But I also don't have the energy to have that type of tunnel vision, because if you're not achieving it, it's so crushing, and I don't have the energy for that anymore. I don't want to be crushed.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's understandable, and that's, I think, that's a factor of, your situation, your age, and everything. I mean, it's almost impossible to think to reproduce.
It is very rough being 29 and uh,
To be 29 again. So,
you could
but
not pay me to be 29 again, actually.
no, oh man,
Yeah.
I would absolutely be 29 again. With where I could actually go to clubs and not die the next day. Oh, that was cool.
Well, I mean, to talk about the other sort of thing, there is the advantage of being, an old maid. I go out to clubs and then I can die all next day, and who cares? I live by myself.
Well, yeah, I live vicariously for you as far as that goes. Um,
But everything's a trade-off.
for sure. Yeah. So while you were at DC, what were your some of your favorite projects?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I think people might want to know what an editor actually does, right?
That was going to be a follow-up question, but for sure, yeah, I think people definitely have a misconception of what an editor is. It's not just, looking over and fixing typos. It's it's vastly, especially in comics, I think it's vastly different.
Yeah, I mean that is the common thing people first think of. They'll think I'm correcting spelling and grammar and punctuation, and I am doing that for freelance right now. So I'm solid at it, but it is actually not my primary specialty. Uh, a developmental editor, which is the type of editing I have done most of my career, is someone who basically takes a project from the very first proposal and pitch stages all the way through publication at the printer. And you are responsible for developing its creative content, which you normally do by assigning it, to outside creative team. But you are still overseeing it. You're giving the parameters of the project. If you are a book editor of original acquisitions, you're still reviewing all the proposals that come in and picking them and working with the author to help them fully realize their creative vision. Um, my poor analogy, because people want to quibble with it sometimes, especially comics people, is my type of editorial work is kind of like being a movie director. I'm not writing it, I'm not acting in it. The writer's the writer, the artist is the actors, but I'm giving them the assignment. I'm helping them create something that will take that idea to its best level and let their creative voices shine through as much as possible. And I'm also responsible for the nuts and bolts. So there's some project management to that. Um, some people would also compare it to being a producer, but I always feel producers are more removed than a director is. So that's
Right.
why I do director. The difference is an editor is generally should be invisible. If they've done their job really well, the creative talent is shining as bright as possible. You're invisible. And at DC, we even had the philosophy that the creators take all the credit, the editors take all the blame, which I got to tell you wears on you after 10 years
Yeah,
as well.
that's understandable. Yeah.
But I understand why it is. I mean, the creators are out there. They are the first people that are getting piled on by fans in both good and bad ways. And so it is good for them to be able to say, blame them, and we can take it. We can absorb it on a level that an individual is less equipped to do and shouldn't have to do. you know, a writer should not have to answer for everything fans hate about DC.
Yeah, for sure. Ideally, yeah. Ideally, you're a little bit separated from people's reactions to your art, and you know,
It's funny though because you should be, as you say, but comics is one of the places where the line between professional and fan are the most blurred.
mm,
Because every, at least this was true in the early aughts through like the teens. Maybe now, maybe it's less now that message boards are no longer a thing really, and Twitter is whatever Twitter has become.
well,
Um,
not everybody's on Discords or whatever.
oh well, there's that. But I'm not. I can't.
I know.
um, is so a lot of people started out in the fan forums on message boards, and then they became professionals, and the professionals were hanging out on the message boards because they wanted to hang out with their fans, and because they are fans as well. Gail Simone started out on just being a fan on message boards, and then she started writing a column for CBR, I think. And her comics work grew from there. But she started out as a fan on message boards, and she just amassed this following because she was so hilarious.
Which I imagine is true for everybody now. Because if you're growing up now, if you're gonna become a professional in the industry, you're probably starting as a fan, and again in the age of social media, I'm sure you've done some interacting. It's almost impossible for you to have not and then become a professional.
And as a matter of fact, a lot of times, especially for first time authors, over in traditional publishing, the publicity team will want to know how big your social media impact is.
Yeah.
What kind of,
What are you
promotional
bringing, so to
impact,
speak?
what
Yeah.
are you bringing to the table? Which
Mhm.
sounds kind of tacky to say like that, but it's
It's the
just,
reality, though. Yeah.
it's the reality. And in my last job, I felt, I never was told to, but I felt the imperative to promote what was happening at my company. And again, as somebody who has kept a low profile online over the years, that was actually very difficult for me to come to terms with.
Which, I mean, I guess we have to bring it up at some point. Being a woman in the industry, going, living through Comics Gate and all of that. I, what, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that which will not be named is still going strong, which is hideous. But if you look at the greater political climate, not that surprising, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is what it is, and yeah, unfortunately, it's not, not going away easily, right?
So, what so being a woman in a traditionally male dominated industry, first of all, if you look at the credits at DC, editorial has become so much more female staffed, and that's amazing. I am so pleased that that day has come. In fact, their editor in chief right now is Marie Javins, who had a long career in comics, and it's very satisfying to see her be the editor in chief. Also, she's cool as hell. Um,
Also,
back
didn't so I'm trying to, so again, my exposure to comics is a little bit limited. I never got into superhero comics, but when I started reading Vertigo, Sandman, Transmet, whatever, Preacher, that I think that those kinds of stories, adult stories, um, tend to fascinate me more. And if I remember correctly, that was a woman running that imprint, right?
Yes,
Well,
Vertigo was created and run by Karen Berger, who's one of my editorial idols. She also edited the comic Amethyst, which had a huge impact on tiny child me. So it's funny. Amethyst kind of looked like was a sword and sorcery type of comic with kind of a dash of Captain Marvel or Shazam, where it was a 13-year-old girl going into this fantasy world and finding out she's actually 20 years old and the long lost princess, to the throne of Amethyst and whatnot. So, and Karen also oversaw one of the most influential relaunches of Wonder Woman when the artist George Perez came on to write and draw it. So Karen is amazing. And she started Vertigo, which was the more mature readers imprint. And Sandman is, of course, its flagship title, and also did Preacher and Swamp Thing and Transmetropolitan and, a host of other amazing comics. Kill Your Boyfriend, that's one of my personal favorites. That's Grant Morrison and Philip Bond, for anybody who wants to seek it out. So, however, Karen was definitely, lightning in a bottle and also fairly isolated. She was lucky enough to be working at DC when the publisher was a woman, Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher of DC for nearly 30 years. So DC's always had a strong female influence somewhere in the company, even when it's pushing back against it because, Karen wasn't always popular, Jeanette wasn't always popular. And I came in when it was still largely male. And a lot of people think that old white guys would especially be the problem, and they're not always helpful, but a lot of the old white guys liked me because I had the old school references and I was very serious, and I also toned myself very down in my dress as well. And this gets into a whole long philosophical thing, and I'm not one to answer it, but I did not suffer the type of sexual harassment that a lot of women in the industry did, and I am forever grateful for that. On the other hand, because I was not particularly approachable, just because I have a naturally serious voice and expression, and I was trying to make myself look as nondescript and not particularly feminine as possible to kind of fly under that radar. And also because I really wanted a clear line between my personal and professional lives, I missed out on the social networking aspect that is so important in comics. So many people are out there elevating each other and helping each other out with jobs because they're all buddies, and I kind of really kept myself away from being buddies because nobody had good boundaries. So I did not want to have to deal with anybody overstepping a boundary with me, or me being stupid and overstepping my own boundaries, which I can do too.
Well, yeah, like at work, I tried to be, as you said, like as complete as nondescript as possible, which, yeah, I mean, maybe prevents me from establishing additional relationships and so on. It's very hard for me.
Yeah.
I'm not a super social person, as you know, so
I am frequent. And when I am in certain environments, I'm not very social either, which sometimes surprises people who know me. But if I don't know you, I'm shy. I was very paranoid about the whole goth thing, that the people I was working with would be unprofessional about it and conflate it with, fetish. And there's nothing against fetish. Obviously those are companions in our scene quite a bit, but I don't need work people conflating that on me, if that makes sense.
yeah, even though you'd think in that industry, especially as you mentioned, Vertigo. I mean, if you're putting out Sandman, if you got Neil Gaiman writing for you, you'd think goth would be okay, but
But he's a dude.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, most times when people met me, they assumed I was a Vertigo editor first.
Well, again, that's just, I think, conflating what But
And I'd be like, nope, I'm working on Batman. I'm working on Hawk and Dove.
or if I recall correctly from your bio, like Looney Tunes. I mean, there's
That's right.
things that necessarily wouldn't think of. Thinking of you. So
Oh man, I love Looney Tunes.
I mean,
That's another thing I was raised on.
I mean, you know, like all seriousness, when I came to this country, didn't speak English at all, right? So my first exposure is, just watching TV, right? It's my parents are trying to, we had no money. My parents are trying to get jobs, so I'm pretty much just plopped in front of the TV. Most things I couldn't understand what the hell's going on. Looney Tunes has a pretty universal, visual language where you don't need to speak the language
Of
to enjoy it.
violence.
Yeah, to enjoy the cartoon violence. So that was my first love as far as like American cartoons go. So
All right. Well, so start when I came on board at DC, I worked primarily on the children's comics because that is where they shove a lot of the women when they first come in. They will handle all the serious superhero stuff and we will handle all the kids stuff and the licensed stuff. But that's fine because my boss was getting more into she was getting more into the superhero DC stuff. She needed somebody to run the kids books. It was wonderful training to really learn what you need from a story pitch. You need the beginning, middle, and end. You cannot say, who knows what will happen? You need to tell me what's going to happen. I'm not the customer. I need to know what's going to happen before I turn you loose on this story. It was great for me to learn how to direct art because you have to have the clear storytelling so kids can understand what's happening, and because it had to pass licensor approval of WB, which is hilarious. DC's owned by WB, but we still had to run this by their licensor approval thing. Intellectual property is weird.
right,
I did also get to work on the Cartoon Network books, which was great because that's when the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy were a thing, where the Grim Reaper is one of the characters. And Samurai Jack was coming out as well, which is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. If you people have not seen Samurai Jack, please go watch it. It's amazing.
yeah, for sure.
And then I slowly got, brought in more and more into the DCU thing. The very first DCU miniseries that was all mine to be the editor of was actually about this cowboy named Batlash. And he was kind of, he was first created in the 60s by Nick Cardy and Sergio Aragones, and I think Robert Kanigher. And people, when they think of Sergio Aragones, they think of, the really hilarious cartoonist for Mad, which he was. But Batlash was actually a much more serious strip. And he was kind of in the Maverick vein of cowboy. He was more of a lover than a fighter. He'd rather, talk his way out of a situation and be a smartass than to fight. But, if he had fight, he'd usually win. Always had a flower. He was a bit of a dandy. So I got to do a mini series that was co-written by Sergio Aragones and Peter Brandvold, who is an established Western writer of Western novels, and who happened to be living in my hometown at the time. It was a very weird coincidence.
Oh wow!
And I got to choose the artist. And if you are a deep comics nerd like I am, you will appreciate that the person I hired was John Severin, who used to be part of the EC stable of artists, EC Comics stable of artists. EC Comics published The Crypt of Terror, The Vault of Horror, so The Crypt Keeper. He was part of that line. And Mad Magazine came out of EC Comics. It was originally Mad Comics, and then it revamped itself into a magazine to avoid the censorship board. So I got hired John Severin because he was famed for his Western
Can I
comics.
ask real quick? Was there a different censorship board for comics?
So, uh, the comics used to be regulated by this thing called the Comics Code Authority. And it was a self censorship board, like the Hayes Code for film. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
All right. But in the 50s, comics were actually put on trial as one of the causes of juvenile delinquency. They were charged with this, as being the cause of juvenile delinquency because a psychiatrist named Dr. Frederick Wortham had written a book all about their evils and had concluded that they caused juvenile delinquency because every child juvenile delinquent that he met read comics.
Mm.
This was the 50s. Every child read comics.
Right. So this is, almost like the precursor to a satanic panic, but just, visual medium.
Yeah. And then, the 50s was the time of McCarthyism, everything being under scrutiny, everything being under trial and under Senate hearings. And there was the Estes Kavaver hearings, and they were scrutinizing all the entertainment out there and seeing what kind of harmful impact it was having on the youth of America. They put movies on trial, and Ronald Reagan, as the head of like the Actors Guild or the movie organization, had to come and testify that movies are not actually harmful to our youth, which is very ironic when you really think about where he headed.
I did not know that. Okay.
Isn't that crazy? So comics went on trial, and the big target was, in fact, EC Comics, because they'd had all these horror comics. Now, they were not the only company publishing these horror and true crime and gory comics, but they were the best. They were the best selling. They had the best artists. And even though there were sleazier operations, they're the ones who really got, all the publicity and the scrutiny. After that trial, and, I think Kafabra was like, whatever, comic books, go away. After that, a bunch of comics companies got together to create their own review board so they could say these comics are up to this standard. It will have the seal on the cover, and newsstands can feel comfortable carrying any comic with the seal on it, knowing that it is, kid friendly. Guess who was not on this board? EC Comics was not on this board because most of these publishers got together to drive EC out of business.
Okay.
At least that's how the story goes, and I can believe it because, it's kicking their butts. So they revamped a lot of their line to be less, less sensational, less exploitative. They took away the horror stuff. But then customers were not so much in their new direction, and like they went nuts they started doing pirate comics, they did psychoanalyst comics, they did Valor. That was one of my favorites of their new direction. It was all historical stuff. But the public just wanted shock suspense stories and Vault of Horror, and it wasn't there anymore. And newsstands found it easier to carry comics that had this seal, so they wouldn't carry stuff that didn't have that seal. So if you weren't going to put yourself under, review of this board, there went your comics. And so for a good long time, mainstream comics were largely funny animals and watered down superhero stuff until Marvel really started to ramp things up, with their innovative storytelling.
How long did
Uh,
that board last? Because I mean, clearly,
they
the
were still a thing when I started at DC. They finally disbanded during my time at DC, but I
so
still
they were
had
still around when like Vertigo was going. So I guess Vertigo's like fuck it and
Vertigo. I mean, Vertigo didn't have the seal on it, absolutely, and also had a very clear for mature audiences
right,
only disclaimer on top. And that, and the reason why they could do the thing, so the seal was for newsstands, like literal newsstands and news racks, and comics racks at like a drugstore. Where things shifted for the need for the comic seal was comic shops started to become a thing in the 70s. These shops would buy directly from the comics companies. They did not have to rely on newsstand distribution or newsstand distribution rules.
right,
The trade-off is a newsstand distributor can return comics. Anything that doesn't sell, they can return. When these shops started up, and it's still the case, they can buy directly, but they can't make any returns. So they have to order exactly what they think can sell. Otherwise, they're stuck with it.
right. Which is hard because it's always hard to predict, especially with maybe new series. But
Yep, 100%. So these shops allowed for more adult comics to start flourishing and more independent companies to start rising up again, because they could finally take chances that the newsstand and the Comics Code Authority was not going to allow them to do. So that is both good and bad about the direct comics market, in that this whole new era flourished, with Vertigo being one of the examples that, eventually grew out of that. Dark Knight Returns being another. Watchmen, you couldn't have had Watchmen on the newsstands,
for sure, yeah,
Um, but it did still become very superhero centric, and that really dominated the landscape for a long time, because that's what sells, and you can't return the stuff, so you do need to keep that influx coming in. Direct sales is really hard on retailers, and I feel very bad for them on that regard.
yeah. Because I mean, I guess you're asking them to take the risk, and
Exactly.
that's
And so, like, DC would hold these sales conferences to try and hear from retailers, and Marvel did not. And and that's not true. I mean, Marvel did. It's just I'm more aware of DC's, obviously. And so every gripe that they had about the comics industry, they'd really just unload at the DC sales reps at these conferences. And we would try and address them, and it was never the right thing. They were always mad.
right, and still is the case. I think people just like to
Sometimes
be angry.
some people just like to be angry, and you know, the internet, the comics internet, in during my time at DC, I've kind of drifted out of that, so I don't know if people are still angry or what. But boy, was it an angry space
Oh,
when
I'm
I
sure
was
people
deep
are
in it.
still angry. Just guessing. I mean,
Probably.
look how movies are received, right? You in the the comics, inspired movies or comic adaptations. I mean, people get very angry over a lot of silly things for the most part,
They sure do.
and that's
Although I will say, I'm still mad that Hawkeye survived 2 Avengers movies. That guy should change his name to Lucky Bastard. So,
what was it like moving to more independent publishing after DC?
well, so I did some. freelancing for a little while, and then I went into the production side of publishing for a while at Scholastic, and that helped me understand, the schedules that trade publishing, that's what book publishers call it, trade publishing operates under. Incidentally, trade publishing also does returns. So, like every sort of profit and loss statement that they do for a book acquisition has to factor in that probably a third of the books that they sell is going to come back, or a third of the books that they ship out will come back. So you
Right.
have to factor that loss into your statement. It's kind of crazy for every book. So I went and did that. And Scholastic had a lot of the same culture as DC in terms of it being a large corporation and those type of corporate concerns, but also that type of corporate support, which, I hate to say it like that, but health benefits are a great thing at a large company generally.
Yeah, that's unfortunate truth about America in general. Yeah,
Yep.
you're
Yep. And then, yeah, I went to a small independent publisher that was distributed by Simon and Schuster. So they sort of relied on that for their distribution. But other than that, everything was, all. And working in at a much smaller place, and that had a startup vibe. Startups, you have to wear many hats. You have to kind of be flexible to how procedures are going to be, because half the time people are just winging it. And I was coming in with the behind the curve a little bit because I had not worked. Trade publishing is such an apprenticeship type of system, and you have to start as an editorial assistant and then an assistant editor, and like you really inch your
right.
way up, learning all these procedures, and you know the workflow processes were not necessarily something I was accustomed to, and getting a grip on all of that at a place where they're going to shift around anyway because it's a startup, that was a big challenge, and not an enjoyable challenge, I'm not gonna lie. But I did get to do some fun projects there. Um, and I also learned some hard truths. I did not like how they treat their work for hire people. I'm used to still treating everybody I worked with at DC was work for hire, but we still treated them with the same sort of respect and acclaim that a book publisher would treat its original creators, its creators of original content, because their name, their credits are part of, why people are going to pick up something.
Right. And plus, maybe you want them to, do things for you in the future. You'd think you would want to, treat people nicely.
Yeah, maybe some basic human decency would be a good idea. Um, and I did not necessarily see that level of basic respect for work for hire for licensed people stuff. And that bothered me. And it was something that stuck with me when I went on to my next position, which was finally getting to lead a department. I was executive editor at a digital media company called Interpop, and I got to develop and lead the publishing division, which was all comics for them. And what I enjoyed about that opportunity was getting to treat the creative talent in a way that I wanted them to always have been treated. Getting their credits, everybody getting royalties, even though it's work for hire, which, by the way, DC does do. You do on a lot of their mainline DCU books. There is a royalty option if your books sell up to a certain threshold, for some of the talent, not all of the talent. It depends on their roles. Mine was for all roles. Everybody gets credited. So, that part was very exciting, and in general, Interpop was really great for my career development, for next career step, and that was also a startup, and unfortunately, it suffered the fate that many a startup, has. But I can't say those weren't 2 good years. Those were 2 good years.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were trying to do was ambitious, but it was also a very volatile market that they were involved with. So, I mean, I think
Yeah.
I'm still not sure what the future is for digital comics in general. It's I don't know. It's tough. Like I'm. It's also. I think it's also difficult for me because you project by default, right? I'm a physical medium person, especially with comics. At some point, when reading just like novels, when it's just text,
Hmm.
I just switch to Kindle because you know spaces at a premium. I have too much shit in the house, and it's just easier. But for comics, I need the physical product in front of me. Um,
No, ironically, I'm a total luddite for the most part. So I too prefer a physical medium. And when I was at DC, um, it was, digital comics were a fast growing segment, but it was like 10% of the reading audience at best. And over in trade publishing, same thing. Everybody thinks everything is online and everything's digital and ebooks are dominating. But honest to God, um, the visual analogy our publisher did at DC was to hold up a piece of paper and be like, "This is all our buying audience for physical comics." And then he held up a string of dental floss and he was like, "This is the digital
mhm.
audience." And it's true. Yeah, I was very surprised when I went over into trade publishing, that ratio was still correct. Most people still buy physical books and physical comics, even with the options available. Now, part of that is because there's not been very many good interfaces for digital comics, I would argue.
Yeah, it's I forgot the app that I use for the most part. Um,
It's probably Comixology.
yeah, comics. Yeah, right, exactly. But it still, I don't know. It still felt a little weird going from panel to panel, and I don't know. It's it, yeah. I think it's hard to convey the experience of a print medium through your phone or your tablet. I mean, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit easier on a tablet just because physically your screen is larger, but um,
Well, our research at Interpop showed that most people prefer to read their digital comics on a tablet. That was their preferred thing.
well, it makes sense because I think it's hard on the phone. It's just
It is.
it's just
At
too
least
limited.
at least if you're doing it in the traditional comics format. Now, people like Webtoon, they do a single vertical scroll, a single panel vertical scroll. And that's an entirely different kind of reading mindset and experience. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but the first graphic novel, I officially acquired was actually a reprint of a webtoon comic, and I had to take that single
Hmm.
scrolling vertical uh, single panel layout and turn it into a multi-panel layout that flowed from left to right horizontally in a book, and rearranging all those panels was an editorial feat in and of itself. But I'm very proud of how it came out. I thought it was a great graphic novel. Everybody should get it. Always Human by R.E. North, published by Little Bee Books under the Yellow Jacket imprint. Read it. You'll love it. Or refine that Webtoon and experience the original format. But
But that's interesting because now I'm thinking there's a couple of comics artists that I follow like on DeviantArt, and once in a
Mhm.
while they'll put something out, and it is like, you know, you see an image and it's just a really like, long vertical column, and which you have to zoom in to see anything. So I didn't. I guess I didn't quite understand why they were doing that. I think you know Soundstone. It's
I've
like a
heard it. Yeah.
fetishy comic, but the writer is really good, and was one of a few comics I think that takes on that content in an
Hmm.
interesting way. It's almost like, I don't know, like it's the fetish version of Strangers in Paradise, almost in a way. I don't
Oh,
know.
well, see, now you sold me.
No,
Absolutely. I love that.
honest to God, it's really like, you know it, it's at a surface level, it's about, there's
You know
fetish
I
content,
love
but
Strangers in Paradise.
it's all about relationships. It's
Right.
just it's a relationship comic. So it's it's actually one of my favorite comics. Just at least adult comics. But yeah, I forgot. It's a Serbian, I think, writer author. He also does some mainstream comic stuff. But
Oh, what's his
um,
name again?
let me see. I gotta Google it real quick. Huh.
Okay. But yes, I love Strangers in Paradise. So at Interpop, that was something that I was very focused on. How do you get the optimal reading experience for something that is really best read as a physical medium? And I was actually very pleased with what we did to address that. But we did largely do it with the tablet audience in mind, and um, optimizing it for phone was a long-term goal that I don't think we ever got to fully achieve.
It's hard, but yeah, the writer was Stepan Sejic. I don't know if
Oh
I
yeah.
pronounce it correctly. So, but yeah, he's done some like Image Comics and
Well, primarily think of him as an artist, and his art is incredible.
yeah, yeah, for sure. His very, very, very cool art. I mean, both
Yeah.
fantasy and just realistic.
I think I worked with him on
I,
one
I
or
feel
two
like
covers.
you'd really like Sunstone.
I will add it to my list.
Um, so, well, let's get into that. What if you were what of a couple, say five um current series that you would recommend? Not to
So
put you on a spot or anything, but
no, it's just to be honest, I haven't collected a single comic since leaving DC.
well, collect it or just read in general.
It's very sad. But I will admit that I am no longer the hardcore collector I used to be. I That is one of the casualties. And when people say you should do what you love, just be aware that can be one of the casualties. What I do now for comics is I just try and find collected editions or back issues of the really old stuff. Well, not the
Okay,
really
so
old
you
stuff.
just went
70s.
the other way. Okay, no, but I mean that's totally fair. Okay, so let's go. As far as older comics go, what are some of your favorites?
Well, so I recently, I guess it was not recent, I guess it was a year within the last year or two, but still, there were 3 issues of Captain America from the 60s that was when Stan Lee was still writing it, and that they were drawn by the artist Jim Steranko, who did like these 3 issues and then dropped his mic. And then he went on to do like the Nick Fury Shield series. Um, they are so beautiful. They are so incredibly well designed. Um, they really pushed modern storytelling in of 60s comics forward. Both the realism that he drew the figures with, the innovative way he did the layouts, like he was doing stuff nobody else was doing. He is unfortunately a full blown Trumper at this point, which I can't tell you how sad this makes me.
Yeah,
Anti-vax,
because that's it's like
the full
Morrissey
thing.
going Nazi, right? It is what it
I'm gonna send you the best Morrissey meme. But these 3 issues, did they really introduced Hydra in a big way for Captain America. They introduced one of my all-time favorite villains for Captain America, which was Madam Hydra. They introduced a new Bucky sidekick possibility with a kid named Rick Jones, who happened to be there when Bruce Banner first turned into the Hulk. This kid has gotten around. And then well, I won't go to give his whole character resume, but these 3 issues are pretty popular collector's items, particularly after the Marvel movies have come out. And finding all 3 of them was such a holy grail for me. Our friend Brian, he actually had them, and I was always so jealous. And then he's like, I'll sell you 2 of mine. I'm gonna keep the one that he actually signed to me personally, but you can have the other 2. That's fine. I'm trying to like slim down my stuff, and I was like, okay. And then I found the 3rd one when I returned San Diego in 2022. I found the 3rd one for a fairly reasonable price considering what those issues are. So now I have my holy trinity, I guess, my holy grail. I have all of the original Miracle Man run, which is another holy grail for comics collectors out there. That was the crazy Alan Moore independent series that was sort of a reimagining of Captain Britain, and it is grim. It was peak 80s grim comics.
You mean Alan Moore wrote a grim comic?
I know, right? Brace yourself. And it predates Watchmen, if I recall correctly. And then Neil Gaiman and Mark Buckingham, who was the artist on Fables later on in his career, they came on for an arc afterwards. That's also considered a holy grail. A friend of mine from the DC message boards gave me his entire run for free one time because he was trying to, slim down his collection in his garage. I have very much benefited from the kindness of my buddies from the internet. I've been collecting back issues of Tomb of Dracula, which was this Marvel 70s Dracula series, beautifully drawn by Gene Colon and Tom Palmer Sr., and written by Marv Wolfman. I highly recommend it. That's where the character Blade was created.
Oh yeah,
he first appeared.
Okay.
Which I always get a laugh. Blade was first conceived as very much blaxploitation vampire hunter. He had the big afro and the weird sunglasses and the streetwear. And there's this amazing panel of him, standing with his knife gleaming. It's a wooden knife because he's a vampire hunter. Why is it gleaming?
Well, maybe there's a varnish, very, very,
very varnished.
very varnished.
Yes. And
I still think Blade was one of the best Marvel comic movies, in my opinion. Even if it's not MCU,
Well, it is considered still part of the rise of the MCU movies, and you can't go wrong with Wesley Snipes. He is a badass motherfucker, that was for sure. And there's also, so I mentioned my uncle had a bunch of comics from Marvels from the 70s. There's a run of Avengers that I'm trying to fill all the holes in, and it's basically from issue 100 to issue 200. And he had the bulk of that already. So it's not like I'm trying to fill that many holes. It's just they're all kind of pricey. And I refuse to really pay much for a comic. I think the most I've paid is like $80 for a comic.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like that's me with music. Like I love music, and sometimes I'll try to hunt things down, but yeah, I can't pay like $300 for like a record or something. I just it's
Do you have a vinyl collection?
I do have a vinyl collection. It's not big, but it's there's a few. And I have a record that's like $600 worth, supposedly on Discogs,
Yikes!
that I
What is it?
found randomly in at a Princeton Record Exchange.
That's
It was
amazing.
Yeah, it was like a limited run old Porcupine Tree, album that I'm pretty sure nobody even knew at the time, and just because I was a fan, I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna buy this, okay. But I did eventually. I actually got a record player because for a while I just had records and no record player, which is um, even it's nice to actually listen to music like that. I grew up, in Russia. That's all we had, right? We had a record player.
Yeah,
Even even cassettes seemed like a luxury Western thing that only people of money had. So
that's amazing.
yeah, and I didn't know CDs existed until I came here. I mean, that was still fairly early in the CD
Yeah.
era, but still.
Well, I don't. My my dad also had a record player. We had cheap little cassette players, so we did have that luxury, I guess. But it wasn't until I was in high school that I got a CD. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Same. I started buying CDs in high school at some point.
what was your very first CD?
Oh, my very first CD was Pink Floyd, "Wish You Were Here." My second one was Fish,
Wow.
which is somewhat embarrassing, I guess, but it was the first and last Fish CD I bought. I don't know. I can't get into Fish that much, but I was dating somebody at the time who was into Fish, and I was like, oh, check
I
that
sense a
out.
pattern with some of your subculture on
Well,
entrance.
the girl I was dating in high school was kind of like a hippie chick, and um, she some of the music she introduced me to was cool,
Yeah.
but it's good to experience different cultures. But yeah, I think collector's mentality, man. I started doing YouTube because a friend of mine was doing a stream about music. He had this whole kind of community of metal streamers.
Hmm.
And man, there's these dudes who are just have these collections of like thousands of weird obscure metal albums. And I don't know. I definitely I have a weakness for collecting things. I've collected a lot of different things over my life, and I have to really kind of watch myself and not to get overboard. And that was definitely true of comics for a while. When I was at the peak of my like you know comics addiction. I was There's a comic store not too far from my work, so on I forget what was the new comics day.
Well, either Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, I think Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't know. So I would, on my lunch break, I'd go to a store and I'd grab the new issues of whatever, mostly Vertigo series that were going on at the time. And now have now have too many things on my bookshelves.
Well, uh, I'm still collecting back issues. I've kind of stopped with action figures. Um, I'm collecting original art here and there, but again, it's got to be affordable. And the other big thing is this is an interesting development of technology. So back in the olden days, comics would be penciled, and they'd be sent to a letterer and lettered, and then they'd be inked. You didn't actually ink until after the lettering, and you did the lettering right on the art board, which meant A, it was a pain in the ass to correct if you need to correct the lettering,
Right.
and B, um, you're the whole page would be composited together. Now, ever since digital lettering started happening, nothing's lettered on the boards anymore. It's done in a file. It's done in, it's added to the layers that have been, after the comic's been scanned in and everything. Or nowadays, you just receive it the art digitally anyway. So when people sell original art now, it doesn't have lettering on it. So I'm committed. I've become more and more committed to only buying art that has lettering on it, which is the more expensive art, but I like it. What can I say? It's not an absolute rule. There's, I have some stuff that did not have lettering on it, but that's that's kind of my weird thing. I'm now collecting more wigs, I guess.
Oh yeah,
Jewelry,
I
makeup.
can't I can't list the various things I've collected over the years.
Well, what is interesting, just steer this back to goth for a second, is I mean, you've been friends with me for a long time. You've seen my look evolve. It's only within the last several years that I've decided to spend my disposable income, especially once I had more of it, on clothes and accessories and makeup. I didn't have that budget when I was younger,
Right.
and my look suffered for it. And um, now I have a whole bunch of stuff. I really need to weed out my closet. Let me tell you what.
Me too.
um,
Me too.
and
Not like we
then
even go out anymore, but but it's
and
just
the
good.
Oh, well, I was just saying, and then after lockdown, once we were able to be social again, I've been very committed to being social because I do live alone and I really missed people. So now I'm like, I'm going to dress up. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to go out. um, so all of that is happening. So I guess I've channeled all my collector's tendencies into looks.
But hey, I mean, at least that's somewhat functional.
I
Um,
guess. I mean, I need to do drag queen makeup as much as I need all of the back issues of Tomb of Dracula, but they're both great. So
yeah, I like this is like maybe the saddest thing. It's like nowadays I feel like I'm collecting like D&D modules and like books on role playing, even though I'm not role playing because you know my group's on hold and I can't whatever. But that's I feel like that's just so sad.
it's not sad. You enjoy it. Source books are fun to read. My laptop right now is balanced on three D&D handbooks.
you know,
I'm that type of nerd, people.
I'm just
All
like
the nerds.
one day I'll actually use this. One day I'll actually run my own campaign and put this to use.
Well, I have a very surly halfling ready to jump back in your game. Not surly. What's the right word? Ill mannered.
Fair enough. It's because they're short, right? They're angry because they're short.
Could be. In one of my other games, I am a dwarf barbarian, so raging out and
I mean
short.
that makes sense.
They look kind of like the X-Men Storm, because got the mohawk and whatnot. Punk Storm as a barbarian dwarf.
I don't know. I think about you know basically how things that I love are popular now, whereas when I was in high school, those things were not cool. And I'm just like, man, why didn't this start earlier? I could have been, I could have been the cool kid.
Well, I like to think we would have been, but I don't know. I was very socially awkward as a teen.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
guarantee I would have been cool
I was
in that.
definitely socially awkward, and that was and high school was when I started playing D&D, and it was when I started playing Magic the Gathering. It was like it was those were the seeds of all like the nerdy things I'm into now, but it was definitely not like a popular thing at the time.
That was that coffee shop I mentioned. That's where I played like my first and only game of Magic, and I was like, I don't understand how to play this. I have never played Magic since, but I have learned how to play TCGs, so I could probably play it now. but everybody I know is really good at it, so I'd get trounced.
Well, I don't know. Like I love mechanics of Magic. I just don't like the financial side. Like I don't want to spend money on it, and that's another thing. Like if you're a collector, it's it's like stay away. Like it was bad when I was. Again, this is like '90s, right? Like because I was already I wasn't outwardly goth, but again, something inside me already felt that way. So
Yeah.
I was weird. I have to play black in Magic. Even though it's not necessarily tactically optimal. It's like okay, so I started collecting black cards.
Yep.
It's very silly, but um, I recently my sister now plays Magic like regularly, and she'll go to like events and stuff and semi
Whoa.
semi competitively, I guess. So
Whoa.
she
That's
was
kind of
like,
crazy.
she was like, play with me. I'm like, okay, you have to kind of catch up. And then she was explaining me all like the newer Magic rules, and I'm like, my brain hurts. Like all the mechanics they introduced since I played last was you know was a little difficult, but the branching factor of that game is just absolutely insane.
What was funny about working at Interpop, in addition to doing the comics, the intellectual property we developed for the comics, we were also developing for a TCG. And most of the game designers were either employees from Wizards of the Coast or Magic champions or both.
Right, like Drew.
He was never a Magic champion, thank God. But yes, exactly.
Well, he worked with Wizards,
Yeah.
right? By the
And
way,
he,
real quick, just in case, I have no idea who will be listening to this. TCG's trading card games. So
good point. So we would do these play tests of this card game, and I'm having to play Magic Champions. So I lost quite a bit. But when I would win, God was I smug.
there you go.
I won occasionally. And everybody was very cool about it. They were very nice. They had no ego about me winning because we all knew where the pecking order of skill was. So if I won, they're like, "Hi, that's great. That's cool. Good job." But, those were few and far between. It was a fun game, and I'm sad that the company shuttered. You can still read the comics online, but the card game you can't play online anymore.
Yeah. Well, understandable.
Yeah. But what I liked about that is it didn't have to be a money sink. They had a full free deck
Yeah.
and it was plenty competitive in and of itself. I did not have to purchase any cards in order to play
Yeah, and I
a
appreciate
strong
that
game.
because I'd rather like give me a deck and give me a deck, give me like a set or whatever, and I'll build a deck out of it. And I just don't want to like okay, to to be basically a better player, you have to financially invest in it and get better cards, and it's just not a path I'm willing to go to. Even my sister, right? She basically tells me like she just plays it for fun, but she tells me like she'll go to tournaments and people come in with their you know
They're long boxes.
yeah yeah, and they have all these cards that are impossible to get, and that unfortunately impacts their probability of winning. So
It does. Well, you mentioned our friend Drew just a few minutes ago. And Drew grew up playing Magic, and he did it. He grew up playing it with all these Magic champions, even back when he was a teen. And they would do this, the sealed deck play, where they would just buy a
that's
deck at
awesome.
the
Like
store.
I would love to play that. That's actually what I did with my sister. My sister's like, well, like you want to build a deck. I'm like, no, just give me a deck and whatever. Like, give me
Yeah.
a red. Like, I don't even want to know the cards in there. I'll just you
Yep.
know whatever comes
So
into my hand, that I'll learn what the cards are and I'll play it. That's more fun to me.
yeah. So they would do that where you just buy a deck and play it, or they would buy a deck and like, keep passing cards around as a draft. But the point was you didn't have to, have this set that you dragged everywhere around with you all the time. But still, to me, that's a lot of money you're still investing if you have to buy a deck every time. I guess it's like $13 to play or something back in the 90s, but I don't know. I didn't have an extra $13 at the time. I was scraping together 30 cents for a clove. Sorry, Mom.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it. But yeah, when it comes, TCGs is definitely one collector area where I'm like, not for me.
Yeah, I have to balance the attraction of the thing collecting and then like the financial impact, because especially as a responsible adult with a family, I can't can't just make crazy decisions. So
It's true. I guess my version of being a responsible adult is, well, I'm gonna wear the wig or the necklace or the eye makeup. So that's functional. That justifies it. I have like 7 wigs hanging on doorknobs around my living room right now, but that's fine.
I mean, look, as you know, I started.
Oh, you muted yourself. You're muted.
I accidentally muted my mic. I don't know how that happened. No, so
It was very smooth. It looked like you really meant to do it.
so I don't know when it happened. So I was saying, I started this fashion Instagram where I can dress up, because I don't get to dress up at events as much, just because logistically it's hard to get out.
Yeah.
But I'd still have more like skirts and dresses than a reasonable person should have of any gender.
I really did not know how many. I was not aware of how deep your closet was. So I've been enjoying your Instagram just because, it's fun to see you really live, live the looks you want to live. But also, I really had no idea how many pieces you have. It's
Yeah,
very,
well, I mean,
very
it's
fascinating.
obviously it's built up over many years. So, but
Yeah.
that's a whole story. But yeah, it's definitely, like I said, but it definitely feels into that collector mentality. It's a dangerous, dangerous thing.
Sure, I have a lace shirt, but I don't have this lace shirt.
Yep, yep. So, so a couple of questions this week. Wrap up. From your professional perspective, if you have any advice for people, let's say young artists or writers, who
Or editors.
or editors who might be, looking to get into a industry, would you have any words of advice?
Even though I went through this whole thing of I was very focused, and therefore I attribute that to me getting what I wanted because I was that focused. I really hid the anxiety and the frustrations I had for a long time because somebody shamed me for having any sort of negative feelings when, I had my dream job. What was I complaining about? That person was a bad friend and a jerk. So, living with that type of tunnel vision can be unhealthy for you, and you need to feel okay loosening its grip sometimes. And um, and if somebody tries to shame you for having any sort of bad feelings, ditch them. They suck. Um, but it's good to immerse yourself in the history. I think it's good to know the foundation of what you're working with, so you know what has been done, you know how to appreciate why things were done a certain way, or just appreciate the art because it was beautiful. um and hopefully that will help you deepen your craft. And you'll always, and it's good to have those deep references. Um, One of my bosses was very adamant that you should always know what's going on in pop culture because it informs the work that we create. And it's good to have those reference points. Um, and because I'm a history nerd, I'm like, yeah, that works for me. But on the other hand, are you going to be at a disadvantage because you don't know anything about the Odd Couple TV show? At this point in time, I would like to say no, you're not going to be at a disadvantage. Um, this is a real thing. There are people of a certain generation that I am professionally acquainted with will go on, will like commemorate the day that the Odd Couple started airing. It's ridiculous. um, so it's good to know what's going on in the zeitgeist. It's good to know what came before you. It is good to be focused and to be passionate, but also to not be hard on yourself when you're not um, achieving everything that you wanted to do as fast as you wanted to. Patience is great, and it's not one of my virtues, and it will help you a lot if you can have it so that it doesn't deter you from continuing to pursue what you want. I hope that sounded good. I'm not entirely sure. I kind of rambled.
No, no, I mean, I think that's fair. Mm, any, I guess, any specific advice? I mean, I feel like what you said is generally applicable to a lot of things.
Well,
I,
I don't know what the youth want to do anymore. I think most of them just want a living wage. That's the
yeah,
thing I'm getting
yeah.
online.
What
Uh,
would be nice to have, like, not, not starve and not absolutely hate what you do. That's the dream. Um,
it's true.
it's not easy to achieve even that bare minimum. You know.
Well, and that is another thing. And I think this really, it may be general advice, but it's very good advice. Um, I was not aware of how exploitative the comics industry was until I left DC because I worked at one of the big two. Therefore, what we paid I knew what we paid people. And everybody can quibble over whether or not it was fair, but oh my god, when I see what all these indie companies are paying, if they're paying, a lot of them are basically like, sure, we'll publish and distribute your comic, and if it makes any money, we'll give you, a percentage of that. And trade publishing considers that exploitative, by the way. Um, so it is okay to not work for terrible wages in this era of Kickstarter and all these crowdsourced platforms and Instagram monetization and whatnot. I think people have the ability to be to be better paid and to be self sufficient in a way that doesn't exploit them the way a lot of these companies out there will. Um, that was something that I had a lot of questions about how we could expand our line at Interpop because I was like, if we do any acquisitions, we should do it like real publishing, trade publishing, and do advances. If it's original content, and Image, for example, will not give you an advance. They will not pay you a page rate like they do for work for hire. All they're going to do is publish and distribute your comic, and they will give you most of the money, probably. I think that's how the deals are set up, but you're doing a year's worth of work that is unpaid before this even gets published. And you better hope Image agrees, you know, agrees to acquire it. That's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, it's a lot of
uh,
it's a lot of upfront risk. Yeah.
yeah.
Just in terms
So
of time.
exactly. So don't if you're going to work with trade publishers, find an agent. There are a lot of agents out there doing graphic novels now. Um, they will really be a great ally for you. Um, if you are, if you ever say, I think this is worth I think this exposure is worth it, that is your decision. I did that back in the day, you know, when I was, but I had a full time job to anchor that, I might add. Um, but making that choice sometimes makes it harder for you to renegotiate down the line with that particular entity anyway. And I just, we are not, we, it's great to see everybody get mad at AI right now because they're like, it's devaluing creative work. But to be honest, creative work and creators have been valued so long already by our society that you should not feel any sort of shame, hesitation, or trepidation about negotiating for what you think is what you're worth. The horrible exploitative people won't pay you that, and you will miss out on opportunities with them, but you're not really missing out on working for exploitative bastards.
I'm
So
always I'm always scared to ask what what do you think the impact of AI is or going to be in the industry?
I don't know. Definitely, definitely. People who are not involved in creative departments and who don't understand the creative process are going to see it as a great shortcut, right? And AI can have its uses in like more analytical stuff, like profit loss calculations and whatnot. But when it comes to, you know, AI doing creative content, the creative community is pretty much like, no, but they're not always the ones in power. And I don't know how that's going to shake out.
Well, yeah, and they're not the consumers. And I don't know. Like going back to DeviantArt, as I mentioned, because that's just a site I've been using for a very long time. Now I see it's completely littered of AI garbage, right? Because it's easy to generate, and there's somebody who puts in hours to draw something, and then somebody who just puts in a prompt, and there's not even like an editorial process. They'll just post like dozens of similar images, and it just becomes junk. I don't know. And I've seen fiction written by AI as well, which is not an enjoyable read in my opinion, because I don't know if you've tried to read some of it, but
A friend did composed a couple of very amusing poems with some AI prompts, and they were funny. Um, and I can appreciate individuals using it on an individual basis, a not for profit basis. Especially if you don't have those skills, it's kind of a fun parlor game, right? Um, but yeah, all in all, people are like, just use Chat GPT to write your resume. And I'm like, Jesus, no.
I
Are
mean,
you kidding me?
good luck if you do that. I mean, even if you, I mean, there's times where it's reasonable to use it, but you still have to go through an editorial process and fix the crap that's in there, because there will be crap, and and make it your own. I mean, I think there's ways it can be used as a tool creatively, especially as a as prototyping for art. I mean, it can potentially, I can see that. I don't know. I hate people putting it as a product, and especially
Yeah,
the fact that it's all still based on people's real work. That's not, it's completely uncredited.
very much so. I do feel that because people have been so invested on open source and open license and pirating and whatnot, that's how we've kind of devalued creators to begin with. So this was always kind of the logical progression to me, and it's also why I'll get on my soapbox about pirating to certain people. Obviously, this might not be the right audience for me to do that, but um, it's just something I understand people who don't do it professionally will enjoy messing around with it, and again, as long as you don't turn it into a product for sale, bless, knock yourself out, create goofy poems. But yeah, the manipulation of existing artwork that is not being paid for by any sort of licensing agreement, um, the devaluation of creating the content, all of that does make all of us concerned, because to an untrained eye, a lot of the AI art, you're like, wow, that's amazing, until you know what to look for. And we're very online. We're in these artistic nerd circles. We know what to look for, but uh, your Uncle Mark, who's like a big time broker at an insurance, company, he's just gonna go, "Wow, that's great. Why can't you draw like that?" And that's gonna be the end of the conversation for him.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's gonna be rough for a new generation of artists because if people don't appreciate your work.
Maybe we'll finally get out of this whole hyper realism, uncanny valley art. Maybe that's what will end up happening.
Maybe because there's definitely a lot of that going on with AI in art. Oof.
Yes. Like in video games too, I just saw a trailer for a WWE game and I was like, wait, I don't understand. I cannot figure out exactly when the real people stopped being shown and the graphics began. It was that incredibly rendered. But not every video game needs that. Makes sense for
And honestly,
WWE.
I don't really want my games to be hyper realistic. I play games to, that's an escape. I play RPGs because I want to be in the world where there's magic and I can feel like I'm, I'm doing something. That's
You're a wizard, casting
yeah.
spells.
I don't need this to be hyper realistic. I don't want the game to be like making me forcing me to like eat food or use the restroom and things like that. You know what I mean? Like sometimes too much reality is not, it's not helpful.
In short, you're not a Sims person.
I've not played Sims. I don't know. Do they make you do that? I don't know.
Well, gather. I don't know. I haven't played Sims since like it first started, and that was. Well, we're not going to talk about when that happened. That was so long ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, too much realism is hard on people.
In a way, that's why I love D&D because it's mostly theater of the mind, and you're not limited to specific mechanics. I mean, you have mechanics in a game, but you're not necessarily limited as much as you are in a video game.
Yeah.
And you can just use your imaginations of how things look.
And make your DM sob in despair when you completely overturn their carefully plotted storyline.
That's why dude, this is actually the last book I got, but it's actually something I'm kind of liking.
Nice.
Lazy Dungeon Master, but it's got some, because there's I think there's logic to the conjecture that too much planning is bad in D&D because your players are gonna fuck everything up and do something you don't expect them to do, and if you plan too much, you're gonna try to not to use not to overuse that term, but to railroad them into the things that you've prepared rather than just going with the chaos.
Winging it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to improv, but that's why I love watching Dimension 20 or listening to like something like NetPod where it's professionally trained improvisers playing the game, and you can see how that can be magic.
Yeah, that does sound amazing. Well, What is the one thing you've always wanted to know about comics, but you were afraid to ask?
I'm not usually afraid to ask things.
It's an expression. What's the one thing
Yeah,
you
no, I
really
know.
always wanted
I'm
to
trying
know?
not now you put me on the spot, so I don't. Um, trying to think. Like, I mean, I've read a couple books on like the process of what's the one that's like considered like
Understanding comics?
yeah, understanding comics. There you go. I think that that helped me understand the process quite a bit. Um,
I also recommend his book, The Cartoonist is Scott McCloud. I also recommend his book, Making Comics. Because
there you go. Yeah, I mean, he seems like a person who can explain things in a matter. It's always hard to explain things.
yeah.
I think that's it's hard to teach. It's one thing to know, it's another thing to teach. But yeah, I don't know if I could give you a specific question, man.
That's fine. I will let everybody know Clark Kent is actually Superman.
What was that?
Clark Kent is actually Superman.
Well, let me ask you: is there when who when you're working with DC, who who's in charge of the lore? Like
That's
like
a great question.
I mean, when again, I think the comics universe is extremely complicated, multiverse or whatever, and in a way you can get away with anything, but in another way you have to maintain some kind of continuity and some kind of
So
main rules.
collectively, it was editorial's responsibility. We were stewards of these characters and continuity, and it was up to us to preserve the integrity of the characters and to have them be consistent with their continuity. And if they were not consistent with the continuity, it better be for a good reason. Which is why we did events like Infinite Crisis and the New 52 brand revitalization and whatnot. If we were going to break that continuity, we're going to break it very hard and very obviously, and then reform, the best parts of the continuity. So, officially, editorial is in charge. We take input from the creative talent, especially when we have a big event in mind and we're trying to build it and flesh it out. Um, it would be up to the editor in chief and probably the publisher to be the final arbitrators if there was any sort of really deep um, divisiveness over it or if the event needed to go a certain way. I will say though, when it came to doing research online, and I'm actually doing a little production work for DC now, which is hilarious. When I need to know an obscure bit of trivia or find an obscure character or find the creative credits for something, Fandom is an incredible resource now with all their wikis.
I was gonna ask, does somebody like DC have an internal wiki, or do we literally just somebody already did the work for us?
The entire 10 years I was there, we were in the process of creating a character and continuity Bible, and it was going to be the definitive thing going forward. Honest to God. Every sort of resource book that we'd put out would be like out of date almost immediately.
Well,
We had
that's
an
right. It has to
encyclopedia,
be
we had
wiki.
a
It has to
who's
be like a
who's.
living kind of thing where
Right. So the nice thing when I was working at Interpop, that was an original IP, original to the company. We created the Bible. We created the characters. We could track how they grew, and there wasn't like 80 years of continuity to have to wrestle with
or discontinued.
or discontinue. I wrote a character in Universe Bible for that. My assistant editor tracked overall continuity with our individual story bibles for each series and each issue. Um, so we had like our basically our own internal wiki system going on, although we do not have an official wiki. This is all on like documents, Google Docs. um, but it is when it's a company owned IP, it is the company's responsibility to keep the lore straight. Wizards of the Coast, is it Wizard? It's either Wizards of the Coast or Blizzard. Actually, I think it might be Blizzard, who just have official lore masters. That's their role. All they do is make sure that they keep track of everything that is happening. And so when other people are developing projects, they have to go to the lore masters to do like their fact checking and, the research work. Literally, they just exist to keep the lore for the company.
I gotta say
And
that would be a cool title to put on your business card, man.
right?
Lore master.
Lore master. And I think company IP companies outside of gaming studios should deeply invest in some of those.
Yeah, for sure. Because I don't know, I'm one of those people who like who does sometimes catch like weird continuity or something like, but this doesn't make sense. It's
Now I want to say
this is like me watching Prometheus.
I think that continuity is a tool, and you should use it as it works for you, and you should not be a slave to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying like it's it's end all and be all. You have to find some balance, I guess.
But you do need to be consistent in the story that you are telling yourself. So, even if it doesn't mesh with 80 years of continuity, the entire arc should have consistent logic.
Right. Certainly within the arc. Yeah, I think that's got to be the priority arc, super arc, whatever. Also.
Yeah, and if it's in a shared universe, it can't deeply contradict what's going on elsewhere in the shared universe. Sometimes you have to fudge the timeline to be like, well, this is why Green Lantern can be doing this with the Justice League and also off in space. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's why you don't use specific dates. You're good.
We don't give them specific ages. Don't use specific dates. It helps. Do you need to know whether Superman is 29 or 35? Will that really impact? I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah.
They were perpetually supposed to be 29. I don't know, for decades. I was always they were 29. Can think about that. Batman's supposed to be 29. I can't cope with that. Batman to me is always going to be older than me.
Yeah,
now I'm getting into touchy territory about that.
29 feels a little young for Batman because it feels like you need a more mature character. Because where you want to be grizzled, but I guess still physically able to do what he does. So I don't know.
Yeah, you want Superman to be 29? How am I going to respect the god of the universe if he's 29? What the hell does he know? No offense, 29-year-olds.
I almost feel like that's it's like elves in D&D being 600 years old, where it's like, you can be 100 years old, but that's still relatively young for you, and which is very, very, very weird mechanic if you think about it in terms of interaction between different races in D&D. It's like, you're gonna die when I'm only 1/10 through my life. That's too bad for you.
Well, I mean, that was the whole thing in Tolkien, right?
Well, yeah, that's really Tolkien's fault. Yeah, and then of course Gygax and them had to kind of steal from Tolkien on that account.
It's an homage.
Yes, sure.
Well,
so I'll do a couple of quick lightning round to wrap up. So if we name a couple of favorites, a couple of favorite artists that you've worked with.
Mm. Well, John Severin, as I mentioned, was one just because, getting to work with somebody who was that far back in history, incredible. And then, Jesus, I'm going to go with my team from Batman and Robin because they were so great to work with. Pat Gleason, the penciler, and Mick Gray, the inker. And shout out to John Kalis, the colorist. They made beautiful Batman comics, and they were a pleasure to work with. And I would work with them all again in a heartbeat.
Right. And how about writers?
One of my go-to writers is Shali Fish, who I have had write a gazillion things for me across multiple companies. He understands the essence of any sort of IP you give him. He loves, the deep, goofy Silver Age stuff that I love, from the 50s and everything. He is professional, smart, funny, a joy. I love him. I also want to give a shout out to John Rosum, who, when he gets something, he just devours it and builds a world so deep and so complex and so incredibly spooky and beautiful. And, you know, we brought him on board on Interpop to write a series starring a character that we had not shown the face and we have not given a name, and we never did either of those things. And he created this whole complicated, beautiful lore and world around him. And also, he makes these incredible Halloween mix CDs every year and sends me one. He's great. John Rosum.
Very cool. And then couple of your favorite projects that you've worked on that you think people should read.
Well, I think I've named most of them. I think I would love it if people read Always Human, a graphic novel by Ari North. It's a soft sci-fi queer romance between two women in the near future. Um, my run of Batman and Robin by Peter Tomasi, Pat Gleason, and Mick Gray. Um, this always gets overlooked, but I actually did an Archie graphic novel for middle grade kids that was written by Sarah Kuhn and drawn by Jay Bone, and it was called Hello Betty as part of the Riverdale Diaries series. And honestly, it is the best middle grade thing that I think I have read in a while, and I'm, if I say so myself. And then there was a very, this is a good thing if you can find it for your kids. I did a DC Super Friends, which was not based off the cartoon. It was based off of Fisher Price toy line. Shali Fish wrote that. J Bone did the covers. A host of other kid friendly artists did it. But they're just simple, fun, um, really great superhero adventures for kids to read that will bring your kids into the DC Comics fold from an early age. And they're full of activities. Kids can cut up the comics. It'll be fun and delightful. And it was one of my favorite series to work on, actually.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, and
And if you want to see the comic that got me raked over the internet, you should read the first Catwoman trade by Judd Winnick and Guillaume March. The artwork is beautiful. It's some of Judd's best emotional writing, and you get to see Catwoman and Batman get it on.
well,
Which they get it on in this. The internet goes nuts. Oh my god, horrible, sexist, blah blah blah. Fine. And then years later, another writer and artist team do Catwoman and Batman like hooking up, and you see them get pretty intimate before the page turns away. But what was interesting is mine had Catwoman in more of a dominant role, we shall say, taking more of a charge,
right.
whereas this other scene had Batman more being in charge, and nobody raked them over the coals.
So
Tell me what the difference is.
Was that really like what, when you say people raked it over the coals? That was their issue. That like what was their problem?
Well, I mean, the art was very sexy, cheesecake type of art. And they didn't like Catwoman's story being reduced to just doing a sexual relationship with Batman. Totally valid. But that's the type of book it was, so I set out to make it if it's going to be that type of book, I'm going to make it a really good one. And it was really good,
But
actually.
but it's also like a weird line because I mean, okay, don't necessarily want to reduce a female character, but also you don't want to deny them agency in their own you know sexuality, being an adult with needs and wants. I don't know.
Well, we are talking about 2011. The conversation had not quite gotten there yet.
Yeah,
And also, I think, it's different. I think Catwoman is a book where we could more safely explore that type of agency. I think if we had done that in Wonder Woman, oh my God, can you imagine? Or Supergirl? Like, I don't think that would have flown at all. No pun intended, considering Supergirl can fly. But, and that's because we are all very weird and have hangups about our heroes and how they should be depicted. And that is a conversation that I'm not going to try and stop, put a definitive close on myself. I don't, I don't care anymore.
not that it's possible.
But I am still kind of disgruntled that Catwoman having her agency is terrible. Batman doing it, it's fine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
She's her relationship. Her goal has been reduced to her relationship with Batman in both cases. Why can't she at least have more agency in it all?
right. Also, I don't know. Again, injecting my kind of personal view, I, to me, it's perfectly natural that Catwoman would take a more dominant role because, A, that she projects that, and B, I think, Batman to me almost feels like, and again, I'm projecting maybe somewhat, but when you have all this responsibility sometimes in your day-to-day job, maybe you want to relax and not have to do that.
Well,
And
Batman is kind of passive in a lot of his romances because a lot of them are with bad girls and they chase him and he kind of stands back and kind of lets them.
well,
I will say this. When I was an intern, I got a copy and I got a copy of the official editorial Bible, so again, the lore for the Batman, and for that editorial team, Batman is celibate. That was the official stance. Batman is celibate. He's certainly tempted, but he's celibate because they just did not want to deal with, various ramifications. And the Comics Code Authority was still a thing. I don't think that is the current. I don't think that's been the editorial team's stance for a long time, but it was when I was an intern, and I always thought that was kind of hilarious.
yeah, I think that was just we just don't want to deal with it, so we'll make him celibate.
Yeah. But thank you so much for having me on, by the way. If
Yeah,
nothing else, it's so great to catch up with you.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I certainly I learned a bunch. So,
Yeah.
hopefully
Sorry if I
for
ramble, everybody.
oh no, that's what this is for, right? So, this medium, we're not edited, so hopefully whoever watches this enjoyed it or will enjoy it. So, go read some comics.
Go read some comics. Comics are great.
Yeah. All right.
Go listen to some good spooky music too.
Yeah. Go support your golf club if you can. Something I don't get to do much, but I really appreciate the opportunity when I can, because I still feel like there's nothing quite like that.
It is exactly as you said. Every time I walk into a goth club, no matter whether or not I know people, no matter what state, city I'm in,
Yep.
it's home.
Yep. Yeah. There's something weirdly universal about it for sure. All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rachel. Have a good night.